That was Vice President Kamala Harris campaigning with the former Congresswoman hailing from the Cheney Republican political dynasty. It's a coalition that would feel unthinkable even just a few years ago. And before Vice President Harris's remarks, here was former Congresswoman Liz Cheney and what she had to say about Donald Trump.
I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year I am proudly casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. Vice President Harris is standing in the breach at a critical moment in our nation's history. She's working to unite reasonable people from all across the political spectrum. Vice President Harris has dedicated her life to public service. I know that she loves our country, and I know that she will be a president for all Americans. As a conservative, as a patriot, as a mother, as someone who reveres our Constitution, I am honored to join her in this urgent cause.
And there you have it. The Democrats doing their coalition building with maybe the most unlikely pairing in recent history. Vice President Kamala Harris and Liz Cheney, even Dick Cheney, father of Liz Cheney, the man still vilified by Democrats for his bullish defense of the Iraq War as vice president. He, too, will vote for Kamala Harris, meaning Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney, and AOC are all voting for the same presidential candidate. These are bizarre times, folks, just to say the least. But maybe, just maybe, this is the Avengers-style coalition needed to defeat the American Thanos that is Donald Trump. Joining me now is Jelani Cobb, staff writer for The New Yorker and dean of the Columbia University School of Journalism. Charlie Sykes, MSNBC contributor, and Juanita Tolliver, MSNBC political analyst, host of Crooked Media's What a Day podcast, and author of the upcoming book, A More Perfect Party. Thank you all for being here. I am going to go to you first, Jelani. You're going to be our historian. You're going to be our historian of record for today, because this is actually a pretty momentous thing that we are seeing happen in the Democratic Party, and that they are coalescing the old guard of the Republican Party, at least the part of the old guard that has the courage to step forward. And that's not all of them. Some of them do not have said courage. The ones who are willing to step out there and make a claim for American democracy, plus progressives like AOC, who actually wedded themselves to Joe Biden's really progressive agenda as president for the most part, and Kamala Harris, who comes from the San Francisco prosecutor's office to the attorney general's office to the United States Senate to the vice presidency, with the full and active and eager support of black women who propelled her into that position, and who is this sort of multiracial coalition candidate just even in her own life. It is extraordinary. It's extraordinary history, Jelani.
It really is. It really is. So I think there are a couple of things that are significant here. One is the fact that when you go back to the history, I'm sorry, my daughter is a little bit upset in the background. You might hear that.
Oh, we love a baby on the show, by the way. You can put her on camera. Trust me, we love a baby. Babies can always be welcome.
One of the significant things here, though, is the location. You know, the location, the founding of the Republican Party. Now, I think that goes to the point that she's, advertising a big tent. You know, we want people who are reasonable, who recognize the threat that Donald Trump presents, et cetera. But go back and think about the circumstances that the Republican Party was founded under. And that's where you see the real historical resonance. That party came together as a kind of wild amalgam of people who were free soilers, people who were former Whigs, which was a political party that basically collapsed, because of sectionalism. Mm-hmm. Even a few people who were from the old American Party, which was, also known as the Know Nothings. And so those people came together. They had less in common than probably any other political organization you could think of, except for the fact that they recognized a common threat. They realized, under the banner of free soil, free labor, free men, that slavery had become the defining issue and threatened to tear the country apart. So that significance of being there in Ripon, Wisconsin, really anchors and relays the point that they're making about the threat they see to American democracy right now.
That is, I mean, it just makes it even more sort of poetic, Charlie Sykes, you know, and as somebody who, you know, you came from the old, you know, in some ways disappeared Republican Party, but the fragments of it are standing up. And you know, and I look, from a policy point of view, some of us who were very deeply against the Iraq War are no fans of the Cheneys, but I give her tremendous credit, as I do, you know, Adam Kinzinger and some of these other people with whom I have no point of agreement on policy, but I give them credit for courage, because not everybody has the courage. Mitt Romney's done a lot, you know, to try to hold his party together and keep the old. He don't have the courage to come out and endorse Kamala Harris. That lady does. And so what does it mean for a party that feels like it's dying under Donald Trump's boot for that woman to stand up and say, I'm with her? And you're there, by the way. I want to note that Charlie's there. Charlie's at this event, so we want to make sure everybody knows where you are.
Yeah. Yes, I am right here in Ripon, Wisconsin, and you know what? You can't overlook the symbolism of having this event here in Ripon, Wisconsin. You know, in 1854, and by the way, I love Jelani Cobb's history of all of this, because that was a moment of real moral clarity for American politics. And the Republican Party was born from that split and that sense of moral clarity. And it really does feel that this is another moment like that. And you could really sense, and we met with her, a group of former Republicans, met with the vice president, with Congresswoman Cheney, and they were very, very aware of the symbolic significance of having this event here at the birthplace of the Republican Party. And I have to say that I don't want to overlook the outreach of the Harris campaign to Liz Cheney and to wavering Republicans, because there is a sliver of more traditional Republicans who I think are soft supporters and have to ask themselves, do they want 4 more years of Donald Trump? Does Donald Trump represent the values of this party? And so this is it is actually rather extraordinary to think about what we are seeing here and the willingness of the Democrats and the Harris campaign to create a big tent. That right now they're saying we are willing to have a big tent. We're willing to not relitigate things that happened half a decade ago or a decade ago. And we are making common cause. And you saw that rather dramatically here in Ripon, Wisconsin.
Indeed. And Juanita, let's talk about this from a Democratic strategy point of view, because the risk in this kind of a play is that the base of the party has a tissue rejection against people like the Cheneys or the Adam Kinzinger, who they remember their policy positions. And then the question is, do you lose any base voters by saying we want to welcome really conservative Republicans in? These are not middle-of-the-road Republicans. These are right-wing Republicans, and saying we want them in the tent. And so there is that question of what's the risk value proposition, and then what is the gain? It is very hard. I think for viewers of the show, I think you guys need to understand, just as an old campaign person, it is really hard for Democrats to ever get a majority of white voters to vote for a Democrat. That has not happened overall in a presidential race since the 1960s. It doesn't happen. And so what Democrats are not fighting for is a majority of white voters. They're fighting for 50% of white women voters. And that is a climb. Even when a white woman was on the ticket, Hillary Clinton, they didn't get 50. So right. Can you just diagnose for us, what are the chances that a play like this gets Democrats to 50% of white women voters and gets them to about the 43% of white male voters? Just tick it up to those two numbers. What are the chances that someone like Liz Cheney can do that?
Whew, it's a tall order for just one Republican, Joy, but the reality is she is not alone. And this event is not alone, because remember the parade of Republicans who crossed the stage at the Democratic Convention. This pitch and outreach has been sustained. And the only reason I think the coalition of Democratic supporters who have long been with the party is accepting it, because it's coming under the banner of survival. Honestly, I feel like this coalition should say, brought to you by Donald Trump, because the threat he presents, it's so wide reaching that people see it and understand the need to band together against it. But that would only be possible with someone like him at the top of the ticket, who has come after individuals' rights, who has been convicted of 34 felony counts, who has attempted to overturn the will of the voters. That is what sets the table for this. But when you talk about who might feel alienated, Joy, I can't help but think about, back to the convention, the push by Palestinian Americans to get a Palestinian speaker on that stage, and they were told no, while we had a parade of Republicans come across that stage delivering a message of unity. And so that is one place where I could see some friction coming out from this. And I will be watching to see how the Harris campaign continues their outreach across this range of support, because they can't afford to lose anyone. And I say that understanding that in a state like Wisconsin, it's still polling within the margin of error, much like all of the swing states. And so it's about this expansive outreach under the banner of survival while still tending to the home base.